First thing I'm going to start with is have each of the panel members just introduce themselves, give a brief description of where they're working, what their role is, how long they've been in those roles. So maybe you guys can tailor questions, then we'll open it up to any asset management questions that you guys have for any of the panel members. If you guys don't have questions, I've got a list of them here that I can throw at our panel as well. But we welcome any questions that you guys have. I'm Becky Nix. I'm the UDOT Bridge Management Engineer. I've been in this role for about 7 years now. I've got 15 years with the UDOT Structures Division between planning, programming, design, inspection, load rating. So I've kind of bounced around to each position within the UDOT Structures Division and landed as the Bridge Management Engineer. So I oversee planning, programming, load rating, inspection, and emergency response at this point. So, Travis, you want to start?
Is this on? Can you hear me? Yep. I'm Travis Kenny. I work for David Evans & Associates, bridge engineer. I've been with David Evans for about 2 years now, and in that role, at times I'll be working with local agencies on some of their asset management plans. Prior to that, I was the bridge maintenance engineer for UDOT. That was for about 8 years, and in that role, oversaw it varied $8 to $12 million budget on working on the state system on preservation, maintenance, rehab, Band-Aids, etc.
Hello, everyone. Derek Constable with Federal Highway Administration. I serve as a bridge management engineer. Been in that position for a little over 7 years now. Working now headquarters office, so as you would imagine, we're betrothed to law and legislation, commissioned to carry out, implement law. We do that primarily through regulation, policy, and guidance, so I'm heavily involved in that. Also dabble a little bit in research and training. In the 7 years I've been in the position, I started working heavily in assisting with asset management plan implementation for National Highway System, bridges and pavements, also transportation performance management, otherwise known as performance measures. Last 3 years or so, brought my focus more to specifications for a national bridge inventory, which obviously is intimately connected with asset management because data does serve as the foundation for asset management. So glad to be here. If you have any big picture questions, I think I'm the man. Obviously, I'm not boots on the ground like some of the folks here, but I'll be happy to answer any big picture questions.
Hi, I'm Amanda Lamott. I work for LTAC, which is another engineering acronym, stands for Local Highway Technical Assistance Council. You may be familiar with LTAPs in your state. Most states have that as part of a university, and it does research and training. But Idaho is the only one in the country where we do project management as well. We do administer all the federal projects on the local system. We were yanked out of the Idaho Transportation Department in 1994 by our legislature. So it's kind of different the way that we're set up. We help work with our 288 cities, counties, and highway districts across the state of Idaho, and we administer the federal funds for bridges and roads, in addition to technical assistance. That's always something that we're available for, whether it's bridges or roads, right-of-way, anything that local agencies need help with, we are always available. One thing that has been our big agenda this past couple of years has been on bridge funding, especially on bridge preservation and replacement. I think everyone in the room has in the same situation where we have an aging infrastructure, and we represent a lot of local agencies that have limited funds for replacement and limited education and knowledge on how to do preservation. So in addition to training, we also helped capture data on the 10 to 20 foot bridges across the state where those bridges can also fail and have catastrophic impacts to the economy, but many of our local agencies weren't aware that those assets were even in place. So over the last few years, we've added those bridges to our interactive GIS map that has information that we pull from the ITD inspection reports on our bridges 20 feet and over. And our big success in that was we used that data to leverage information to the governor's office and the legislature. And last year, They approved $200 million for preservation and replacement of local bridges. That was to tackle 30% of our local bridges in poor and posted condition. And it's been so successful in 1 year that we have another bill for another $200 million currently proposed in our legislature this year. So that would hopefully get 60% of our bridges on the local system taken care of.
I'm Dan Gorley. I'm the Bridge Asset Management Engineer for the Idaho Transportation Department. I've been in the position for about 9 years. I've been with the department about 20, most of it in the bridge section in design, load rating, and asset management operations. And so anyway, we oversee the inspection of all the bridges in the state. We're partners with LTAC and Amanda. It is an outstanding thing that they're getting an infusion of money in regards to the local bridges, because I see those poor bridges on a daily basis. And so that's been pretty impressive. You know, some of my experience, I've worked on the transportation asset management plan for the state, and I've done some similar bridge asset management plans specifically for signature bridges, similar to what Becky was talking about. On 10 of our bridges, but maybe 12% of our inventory, though. So that's kind of a unique thing we've done. And anyway, I'll pass it along.
I'm Jeff Hill. I'm the bridge management engineer for New Mexico DOT. I oversee the NBIS, the NTIS, our loan tunnel. We've got about 120 railroad bridges that my group also oversees. I've worked on our TAMP. I oversee permitting and load rating, and I also oversee our preservation program. Currently, we have about $25 million targeted specifically for bridge preservation. I'm also working, our management, I guess, made the decision to use some of our bridge formula funds for local governments. It was like, we're using 15% of the $45 million that we got specifically for local agencies. So we're in the process of identifying bridges owned by local governments to use some of this funding. When we first saw the numbers, 15% of 45 million, over 5 years, I think it comes out to 33 million or something like that. You know, we thought it was a lot of money and that we're going to be able to do a lot of work. But as we dug into the numbers and looked at what prices have done, I guess our expectations have lowered some with what we've seen prices do.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and open it up for any general asset management, preservation asset management questions that anybody has for our panel members. And if we don't have any general questions, then I'll start running through some of mine.
So question for Becky, Dan, and Jeff. So a lot of state DOTs run scenarios and do basically get results from that. And from my perspective, when I talk to state, they do it for TAMP, but different DOTs get different results from those and utilize it for prioritization or optimization. So how does Utah and Idaho and New Mexico utilize the result of those scenarios?
So I'll give just a real quick on how Utah uses it. But generally what we'll do is kind of a validation of what we've selected through other methods right now. We're hoping to get to the point that we're a little more comfortable with what that optimization is, and we can start using that to build our program. Obviously, we use it for our TAMP, but we also use those scenarios to try and identify to our senior leaders what our funding needs are and what funding levels we need to be at for certain levels of performance of our system-wide. So as we're looking at some of the upgrades to BRM and hopefully being able to balance a little bit more between preservation and our rehab and replacement program, we're trying to bring that in a little bit more and use it more for our actual prioritization up front and not just validation of what prioritization we've done. So.
Yeah, I look at like AstroWare or any of the management systems. They're just a tool. They're a bridge asset management software tool, and so you know you get out of it what you put in. So, I mean, I agree with Becky. We're using it to, our STIP is put into it. Our bridge asset management specific plans are put into it to refine it. And then the modeling gives you some scenarios, and it helps validate what you're doing. And in any system, you can put in your utilities and your priorities and your capacity of what's important and what you want to roll to the top, or what are your goals and priorities. However, it's a tool, and there's still decisions to be made. You have to manage the politics and all your districts, and you have to balance the funding, and you always have limited funding. So it's a collaborative process, and it's a useful tool. One of the most useful things I found out of the software, and we're the same, we're developing the software, and we continue to mature and grow over the years, and I think costs are challenging in any of the softwares, and inflation and the political climate and the money you're getting. So it's pretty hard to balance all that. I was thinking about the artificial intelligence question, and I was trying to apply it. I'm not sure if it'd be practical or not, but it had me thinking. But anyway, I guess one of the best benefits I'm getting out of like this modeling is, one of the things it does is it not only is it help doing the optimization, but it's really good at with the condition state. So it's really good at predicting. It's showing you what's poor, but it's good about predicting what's going to go to poor, and it helps you pick bridges that you might not have been looking at that are higher risk and things of that nature. So the tool's working. I think we got a long ways to go on all the tools, but anyway, that's a little bit of Idaho Spin.
New Mexico, we're pretty much the same. I'd agree with everything that they said. One of the things that I'll address, and I've got Peter Creighton out in the office, who's our BRM expert, I guess. One of the things that we've been working on is trying to connect our BRM software with what's in our STIP. We really have struggled with getting the same results, in that many times we'll run scenarios and what's in our STIP for the next 4 years doesn't match up with what BRM, I guess, is giving us. And that's something that Peter's been working on, is trying to get those into our BRM software so that it knows what projects have already been selected. But the other thing that we use them for is, I guess we use it as a starting point, what we get out of BRM. There's always the boots in the ground. Basically, we generate, as far as New Mexico, we generate 6 lists, 1 for each district. We tend to be 6 different kingdoms in New Mexico, and each district is kind of like their own little kingdom. So we'll select lists, and that's where we'll start from. But then there's nothing like boots on the ground and sitting down with engineers at the districts, and they know their inventory, and that's where we take off from. I was going to ask Peter, do you have any idea what, as far as a percentage of bridges that BRM selects, how it compares to what we have in the STIP?
I've been working with recently, so we are, I guess, trying to get results to map the because we're in our very good condition, so trying to line it up, and it's around 27%.
So we like to at least be able to get up to 50% of what BRM selects, match it up with what's in our STIP.
Yeah, the last time we ran ours, we were right about a 60% correlation in Utah, so we were feeling pretty good about that. So,
I'll make some closing comments regarding this question. Generally, what I've observed is there's several different stages of implementation. I'm not speaking about configuring your management system, but regarding use and levels of use. And it seems like the first level that I observed is just evaluating different levels of funding, but spending that funding, having the management system select projects and invest in accordance with just pretty much what has been historical practice for the agency. So that's generally first level, all right? And requires, I guess, it still requires a lot of input, but as you move to the second level, requires a little refinement of the configuration and input where you start to vary not only the funding level, but the distribution of funds or allocation between the different work types, preservation, replacement, rehabilitation. So that's where, you know, you're starting to try to fine tune and see what different outcomes will occur over the long term by varying the split of funding. Obviously, that's where preservation takes importance, because evaluating outcomes over the long term, that's where you're going to see the benefits of preservation. Don't typically see them as an immediate bump in condition and so forth. The third level is picking projects, all right? Using your management system to actually pick projects in accordance with the strategy that you simulated and selected. That is where particular level of refinement in data, your models and such is key. And I think Becky's feasibility study demonstrates that. You know, there's a lot of data that needed to be you know, procured. That wasn't just the visual data. That's what you have within your management system, generally speaking, is visual condition data. Very basic costs, you know, kind of representative of the whole. You can split up the deterioration models, the costs, and so forth by different types of bridges, different locations in your inventory, and so forth, different environments. But still, that data models is kind of representative of a whole, or a portion of the whole. So to actually get to the point where you're reliably picking projects, I think that's where representative data becomes vital. And I think the future is only going to aid that as we advance the use of NDE to identify what's happening beyond just the surface. Key for preservation, right? Because preservation of good bridges, trying to pick out which bridges to preserve and which not. You know, we're working under limited budgets, can't preserve all the good bridges. So which ones are the lemons, which ones have environmental stressors that we want to nip in the bud. That's key to preserving good bridges. Fair bridges, you're kind of caught in between, betwixt and between. Do you preserve, do you rehab? Do you let them deteriorate until you need to replace? There too, more representative data, both condition data, cost data, and so forth, just to refine our models. So that's where we want to head to in the future.
Well, good afternoon. My name's Ryan Nadaluk from Stantec. Derek, I got a question for you. At your federal level, do you all track what asset management programs DOTs are using, and do you look at whether they're off-the-shelf type software, or if they're developing software and deterioration models on their own? Have you all looked at that? And if you are, what are the top 2 or 3? I mean, I know we've talked a lot about VRM and things like that, but I'd just be curious at a high level to know.
We don't formally track. We have an idea, though, just from our partnership with the states and conversations. Transportation asset management plans for National Highway System, bridges and pavements, they typically do identify the management system that's in use if it's commercial off-the-shelf software. Not all states have yet chosen commercial off-the-shelf software, although you know, it's quite an undertaking to develop homegrown software that can perform all the functionality, and particularly in a dynamic manner where all the deterioration models, the optimization, benefit cost analysis, we're all talking to each other. Some may try to use spreadsheets and so forth to accomplish that, but to have everything talking to each other kind of has to happen all under one hood, right? Just like a car engine. But certainly BRM, Ashleware BRM holds the lion's share. I think they have 40 plus licensees. And there's, of course, Agile Assets, Dayton DTIMS, they follow suit. And I think there's others, since the federal requirements came into play, I think there's others that are developing. I'm not certain about InspectX, but InspectX, whether you have anything going on, but you may want to talk to Stantec as well later. Okay.
Okay, thanks. One more question back here.
Hey, question for Derek. Burrell Nickerson from Alaska DOT Central Region. Through conversations with FHWA and out of our Juneau office, we've been, well, let me back up for a minute. Maintenance and operations, which I'm a part of, we rely heavily on federal PM funds to go out and do minor bridge preventative maintenance. But we also share that money with our design section and construction section, and they'll typically put out the larger contracts, things that we, being maintenance and operations, typically can't take care of, or usually a contractor, it's usually above and beyond what our what's in our wheelhouse. Anyways, FHWA has led us to believe through some recent conversations that PM funding activities could be changed here in the near future. They haven't relayed to us what that's going to be, what's going to be allowed, what isn't. Seems like over the years things have changed. Some we've federalized a lot of activities, whereas other cases we've had to revert back to using state money. So, from a global perspective, can we expect changes for the use of PM activities for preventative maintenance on bridges?
There's nothing that I'm aware of. We heavily support preventive maintenance. We have for decades now. And generally speaking, we're pretty open-ended as to which activities can be performed under your preventive maintenance policy that you establish with the division office. Certainly, they do have to have the goal of being cost-effective and selected in an appropriate manner, applied in an appropriate manner. So your reactive routine maintenance still doesn't generally fall within that category, but even what has been called routine in the past, like cleaning debris from bridge seats and washing bridges and such, that, we've all been on board with that as being eligible. So to answer your question, I'm not aware of anything that's coming down the pipe, particularly that'd be restrictive.
I'm Raj Ilani. I'm the bridge preservation engineer for Federal Highways in headquarters, and I'm with Derek. So I will echo whatever he's saying, that we haven't heard anything in terms of preservation not being part of, that something is against that. As you know, the MAP 21 basically had allowed preservation as an eligible activity. So that's how we are going by. And we have a bridge preservation guide that kind of lays out exactly what kind of activities we are talking about in terms of preservation and all that. So I would say that I don't know who is giving you that information. That definitely is not coming from headquarters. We haven't heard anything.
Maybe you need to have him talk to Derek and Raj here. So. Are there other questions out here before? I know Becky's got some.
In terms of snippy data collection, so what are the states doing as of now, and what are they planning short term in 2023?
We're going to cry. That's, no. What we're doing as far as implementation of the SNBI starting in 2023 and that data collection and how we're going to start collecting that now, or if we are.
You know, I think if you got risk-based inspections like on 48 months or something, you're going to have to start a little bit earlier, or once they draw the line, you'll be scrambling for some of those bridges that are going to fall later on, and they'll be out of compliance. But other than that, we're baby stepping into it. Probably try to get the risk-based one approved first. You know, there's some things with the tolerances that I've had to write ourselves memos for that we're going to follow. And so our division engineer from Federal FHWA is starting to push some of those items. So, and plus, I believe, Derek would probably have to speak, they're trying to get their software systems going so they can accept it. Oh, sorry.
I guess there's a couple of things that concern us at NMDOT. One is bridge rail. We're trying to figure out how we're going to handle gathering all the data for bridge rail. That's really concerning to us. The other thing is all the procedures that are required. We have talked to a couple of consultants about coming up with a bridge procedures manual, see if we can incorporate some of that into that. And yeah, the other thing is those inspections that we have on 48-month intervals. I believe that we have to start collecting that data by January 1st of 2024. So in order to be able to submit that in January 1st, 2028, I guess. So the way we've handled it internally is we're starting to break the SNBI into sections and assign it to different engineers in our group, and seeing if we can come up with a report as to exactly what's going to be required. But yeah, we're also kind of taking baby steps, but it's something that's out there and we know that we have to start working on, but slowly, I guess, and waiting, I guess, for the big change in BRM so that we can input that data. But like I said, bridge rail is something that really concerns us, in that the coding that we used to have for bridge rail, maybe our inspectors, you know, would just either, it wasn't that great of data. It seems like that's something that maybe is going to take a lot of resources for us to gather.
I heard like Oregon was getting proactive on the scour.
Do you wanna?
I'll just add from Nevada, because over half our inventory is currently on 48-month frequency. So we are working with our consultant, Stantec, to start collecting that currently, like this month. So, so we've had some meetings and trying to discussions. So we're just going to do the best we can to get as much of the data as we can. So.
I'll just toss in a couple quick Utah things. So we are looking at potentially hiring a consultant that's going to go through and start pulling from the plans any of those additional fields that we weren't collecting previously, and doing a holistic look through our entire inventory and just kind of doing a high-level QC of all of our NBI fields, make sure we've got correct data on number of lanes, widths, span lengths, and holistically go through our entire inventory and check that at the same time we're adding those other fields in. Because if we're going to be in those data files anyway, we may as well do a holistic check and make sure we've got the most accurate data in there. We're going to start collecting pretty much as soon as BRM is ready to accept it, and just not submitting that portion of it. The other thing that Utah's doing, I think, a little bit differently than a lot of states, is we are not going to extended frequencies on any of our bridges at this time, just because we want to keep getting those data points and having that asset management collection. Obviously, there's savings to going to 48-month inspections, but you start missing those data points in your deterioration curves, and so that's kind of the direction we're going. So, okay. Any other questions? All right.
Following up on that question that was just asked, speaking about the SMBI, obviously there are changes from coding guide that can benefit asset management. The work performed item and your work performed, which covers everything except routine maintenance, generally speaking, capturing that information. A lot more detailed material and type information. Now have material and type information for substructures, foundations, as well as protective systems, and a little better information on span sets, rather than just having approach spans and main spans. More detailed information on how a bridge may vary across its length. But I'm interested, as a follow-up to that last question, is a work performed item is going to be of large benefit to those that are in the business of developing deterioration models and work action effectiveness models. That process of mining data right now, you need to make a lot of assumptions as to which bridges had work performed and what type of work and so forth in order to separate them out from the bridges that you're using to develop your deterioration models, because you want those models to be native deterioration rather than the effects of work. So for our users, for academia, I think that's going to be a vital item. But of course, that item, those two items, year work performed and type of work performed, needs to be quality data. So I guess my follow-up question to here is, for the states, do you see any difficulty with procuring that information starting in 2026 or 2028 moving forward? Yeah. And I see a lot of head shakes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge for us to get that data just back from our construction crews as far as how much pothole patching was actually done and actual quantities, and getting as-built back, and then trying to get that historical for us is going to be really challenging. We have certain parts of it, major rehabs, replacements, we've got all of those within our bridge files, but preservation treatments and some of that, we definitely are going to have to do some digging. And Travis, did you have something?
Oh, yeah, sure. So tracking the money is the easiest way to try and get a reasonable idea of what it was and when it was done. So if you fund all that routine maintenance or all that maintenance work, then you have a reasonable shot at it. But if it's the district maintenance crews that are out and they're overworked, right? They're maintaining a big inventory generally. I guess maybe there's some crews out there that aren't overworked, but I assume most of them are. Like if you ask them, hey, tell me every time you do a deck treatment, tell me every time you do a patch, when did you replace that joint? What did you replace it with? Put it into a spreadsheet and send it to me, right? That's a big ask. That's not their normal workflow. They're not engineers that hang out with spreadsheets all day. And so there have been efforts before where we said, we really want to know some of this information. And it kind of came back with, yeah, I don't think so. So, bigger projects you can track through funding. Other than that, it's going to be really challenging.
I'm going to ask one other quick, are you done with that question?
Well, I was just
Okay,
going to add something. I'll be real brief. I think both Becky and Travis here started kind of going down the road of saying that they would track and report quantities, which is important, but that's not needed for SMBI reporting, just to be clear. But it is important, and I think in the future, I think it will become easier as we implement BIM models and so forth, because having that quantity information, particularly knowing where the patches were performed, having that on a model, either 2D or 3D, then you can start to identify changes in condition state. Have that occurred to the area that were patched, or did it occur to another area that was in CS2 also, but not patched? So then you can start evaluating the work action effectiveness. You know whether your patches are deteriorating or something else is deteriorating. Yeah.
Did you guys have anything you wanted to add on this piece of it? Okay.
If not, We've talked, and it seems like the conversation has been mostly about DOTs, and that's great because there's a lot of DOTs here. But there are some local agency people that are here also, and I know that that's a whole nother set of challenges when you're a local agency and you're trying to, you still have to manage your assets, no matter who you are. And are there different struggles that, and I think Travis, you work with a number of local agencies, and Amanda also. Is there anything that you can provide local agencies, or a way to answer that question? How can they manage their assets better?
So local agencies is a very broad category, right? There's some that rival DOTs, have huge amount of resources, and are very sophisticated in their modeling. So I don't want to lump everyone together, but if you're specifically talking about challenges, let's talk about the local agency that doesn't have a single engineer on staff, right? And that it's managing an inventory of bridges, right? And right, like what are they supposed to do? Right, and my suggestion would be is that hopefully that they have a very active partnership with their DOT that is hopefully helping along with that process. If not, hopefully they have good consultants on board to help kind of supplement some of that information. But I've talked to a lot of them where they're like, hey, I want to do what's right. I don't know where to start. So like I got these inspection reports. I don't know how to read them. Like, and they're like, and even if I did know how to read them, I don't have time to read them. It's like, what are you supposed to do? And so it's a resource issue. And so I would suggest strongly that DOTs and consultants should help step in with that.
I can speak to that too, actually. This is a question that I can speak to quite a bit because that's really our primary role at LTAC for Idaho. We work with, just like exactly like what Travis said, we have agencies that have a lot of local dollars and have a very good handle on their assets that they manage and maintain in their inventory. But we also have counties that have over 300 bridges and no engineers and 4 staff, and one of them's a clerk. So, we really step in a lot on that with education. That's part of our role, is to provide education, and we've really focused on bridges. We held a bridge workshop just for preservation in the state of Idaho last year for local agencies. We got that funded through a STIC grant, and we were able to do a day of in-person training and then a day of on-site. And I know many of the suppliers in this room were there doing demos of their products, but I think that's the first step, is just education on how to read your inspection report. I know something that people brought up, that they get these reports and they don't know what they mean or how to read it or where the bridges are. And I think there's a wide range of local agencies, but I think the way that we're trying to tackle it is on all of our federal applications for funding, that is a scoring criteria, is, do you have an asset management plan, and how does this project that you're applying for rank on that plan, to try to get agencies to be thinking about that as they're applying for projects. Did you just pull this out of the air? Is it the project that has the most complaints from your agency? Because that's usually how projects get funded a lot for many of our local agencies. But we're trying to get people to think about more long-term and invest in preservation, especially where we have no funding source to fund it.
Yeah. Another thing that, since we've worked with local agencies, that I've observed, a real challenge for them is just getting the data. If you're a state DOT, you have the bridge database, and if you're a local agency, the DOT might tell you, no, we're not going to give you the data. We don't have the resources. You got to go to the NBI. And it's there, but it's not fresh. It's 2 to 3 years old. So for the agencies, the local agencies that would want to do it, I really encourage the DOTs, to work with them to develop queries so they can get at the data.
That's a very sad point if that is the case. But hopefully, if you are a DOT and you're in here, you are able to share the data easily. And if not, that might be something to consider. We are running kind of short. We've probably got a little bit more time if you want to continue the conversation. I don't want to cut anybody off. The other thing that I will say is tomorrow we've got 2 different rounds of peer exchanges, And one of those, there will be a peer exchange, 2 sessions dealing with asset management. So if you want to continue the conversation beyond today, I strongly encourage you to do that tomorrow. I think obviously this is a great topic. So if there's anyone else, we have a little more time. We can go as long as you want. I mean, I can stay here all night, so.
Yeah, I have a question for all the DOTs on the panel, and then a follow-up to FHWA. In Colorado, my name is Mike, CDOT, and one of the things that we're seeing in our inventory over time is that our good and our fair have recently swapped. We used to have 60% good and 30% fair. In the last couple of years, that has significantly changed. We have a large enterprise which funds a lot of our revenues towards poor. We look at FHWA and their language for a lot of the flavoring of the money that they infuse into our state, and that really focuses on poor. I look at my local agencies and I assess their inventories. I'm seeing the same behavior as my statewide inventory. I was going to ask, do any of the DOTs up there, are you experiencing the same thing? Do you have any concerns about that, and how are you handling that, if so?
Let's start.
I don't know any that aren't, but that's part of why we're all here, right? So go ahead.
I haven't, is this working? I haven't really seen a huge movement from good to fair, fair to poor. You know, in regards to the, we've kind of been even kill a little bit. We're we've been slowly trying to get to 80% of state of good repair, 6 and above MBI. And so I haven't seen a huge shift. We've actually been increasing a little bit on the NHS in good. And one bridge could move our poor 1 percentage point or 2, you know. So I really haven't seen that trend. Our concern is just funding resources, contractor availability, and trying not to go down on the curve in regards to good bridges.
I think we've been on that trend for a long time. One of the things that always concerns me is with our upper management. They make we don't have a lot of bridges in poor condition. I think we have around 5%. But one of the things that always concerns me with our management is they make the assumption that because we don't have that many bridges in poor condition, that everything's good. And I always try to point out to them, we're fair. I guess we strive to be C students because a huge part of our inventory is in fair condition. And I know Derek a while ago kind of mentioned that, you know, preservation program to target your good bridges. We've kind of taken maybe a little bit of a different strategy. We tend to target a lot of our fair bridges and do minor rehabs or even major rehabs and try to keep those bridges from going into poor condition and hopefully try to move them to a condition state of 6 or 7 and hope that we can keep them there. We have a lot of issues in New Mexico that maybe are similar to the other western states. We have huge temperature fluctuations, so a lot of concrete cracking, a lot of, we've been having, I think, I wasn't here for Shane's presentation, but we have a lot of problems with expansion problems, I guess, we've been seeing all over the state. But yeah, I guess we're on that same trend where we do have a lot of bridges in fair. But we do have a pretty robust, I guess, preservation program where we are targeting those bridges in fair and trying to move them to a condition state of, you know, higher condition state.
Yeah, in Utah, we've definitely seen that major shift. In the last 4 years, I think we've had about 30% of our inventory go from good to fair. So we're seeing a huge shift of it. We're lucky enough, our poor inventory is less than 1%. So we got really tiny amount in poor, but we've got so many sitting in that low fair that we're sitting right on the edge of a cliff. And I know it's coming. We've been watching it come for 8-10 years, and it's getting here. So our primary approach that we're taking to it is how many of those low fares can we do some sort of rehab and limp it along, because I think most states, when the interstate system first came in the 60s, we had tons of our bridges enter the inventory at that point in time. And those are all coming due. They're at their 50-year design life plus, and they're all coming at once. And so what we'd really like to do is start to flatten that trend a little bit and get more of those on a rehab cycle for now, so that their replacement is 5-10 years out, 15 years, and it starts to flatten that curve, so it's a more cyclical, even need that we have, as opposed to every 40, 50 years, we have this massive need that comes in at once that's just not sustainable. So,
I guess, Mike, one of the things, and like I said, Shane mentioned it during his presentation, is one of the things that's concerning to us is we have a lot of bridges, as Becky mentioned, that were built during the interstate period, and we're having a lot of problems with, a lot of issues with bearings, where we're actually skipping the poor phase, and we're jumping from fair to critical, it seems like overnight, where we're seeing huge spalls on some of our pier caps, and those are the bridges that kind of concern us. We kind of start up a program to identify all those bridges with bad steel bridges that are locking up on us, and take care of those. But yeah, a lot of those interstate bridges are all coming due at the very same time for us.
Sorry, and I don't mean to dominate, so get ready, Derek, here you go. So it comes down, when I look at the inventory, I look at a couple things, right? I look at revenue, I look at maturity of the asset management program, I look at the age of my bridges, and I think those three things are really the big players in how we're seeing that trend play into our inventory health. Is FHWA looking at doing anything in the future to make an assessment just overall on that metric for the states to help determine if we need to start changing up what states get what revenues, and to really focus on asset management versus the worst first, or focusing on the poor bridges? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Well, it's an easy question to answer, because it's beyond Federal Highways Authority really to dictate how funds are going to be distributed. That's legislature, which of course is influenced by states that speak to U.S. representatives and so forth. But you bring up a point that is valid, of course, because we moved towards performance management in 2012, MAP 21, which had the goal of having performance-based programming, right? Which theoretically would also have an objective of not linking funding distributions, allocations to each state, where you break up the pie and make those distributions to the states, where it wouldn't be based on simply percent poor deck area. You saw a small move away from strictly that in the bill legislation, because the highway, the bridge funding program, it's based on now 75% weighting is given to the percent deck area that's poor, and then 25% to the percent that's fair. All right. Again, that was the Congress that dictates that. Federal Highway didn't have a say, so to speak. Although we do provide some advisement, I think it's just the fact that our administrators, our executives, politicians will always fear poor bridges, right? So I guess now that we're in an age of asset management, we need to continue to paint the picture for them as to other means of allocating funds.
Any more burning questions? Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow? Or, we also are all, probably most of us are going over there, so you can continue these conversations. So, and that's part of the reason that is such a valuable thing. So I think if we're good, if no one has anything else burning right now, we can go ahead. Are you good?
Yep, great. Thank you, everyone.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.